This is lecture 4, Digital Storage and Digital Security. The materials for this lecture come from Discovering Computers, modules 5 and 8. This is a sampling of these materials. It's not by any means everything in the book. The items in this lecture and on the quiz afterwards are the ones that I felt were more pertinent to this class. Starting with digital storage, the definitions of a digital storage medium is any device which holds data, programs, or any other file that your computer requires to operate. And types of media, which I think we've talked about in previous lectures, include the hard disk drives or solid state drives that you find in modern PCs and laptops. Also, memory cards, which are usually in most smartphones and some tablets, USB flash drives, optical drives, which are kind of going out of style, but they're still used out there, and of course, cloud data storage. Now, terms used to define data storage in terms of size, you can see on the list here ones that are probably familiar and ones that you may not have heard of. Now, back in the 70s and 80s, most storage was expressed in terms of kilobytes or 1,000 bytes. And as time went on, we started to see megabytes and then eventually gigabytes becoming common. In the early 90s, a gigabyte was unheard of, except possibly an industrial-sized hard drive or a group of them. Much like a petabyte now is considered quite large. That's 1,000 terabytes. Right now, most devices are in the gigabyte to terabyte range. Your average laptop might have a terabyte, 500 gigabytes of storage, something along those lines. Terabytes are quite common. Very affordable mechanical hard drives can run in the 5, even 10 terabyte range. There are no petabyte hard drives yet that you'll see in common consumer devices, although eventually we will reach that point. That, of course, is 1,000 terabytes or 1,000,000 gigabytes. And then going on up, exabyte, zettabyte, and yottabyte. It may be quite a while before we ever see those, if ever, being used. Those are absolutely gigantic amounts of data. But right now, as I said, the petabyte is coming close as far as becoming common eventually in smaller devices, probably within the next, I'd say, 5 to 10 years. We'll start seeing storage mediums that go up to those amounts in consumer devices. And a little note on the idea of storage versus memory. In our previous lectures, I did discuss the idea of memory or RAM. And that is something you find in most desktop and laptop computers, of course, and in other devices as well. The idea of RAM, if you recall, is a fast type of memory. However, it is temporary, so it's only used as a temporary storage area, and it's what is termed volatile. In other words, when you turn the device off, that memory is erased. Now, the difference between that is storage type memory, which is non-volatile, and those are the hard drives and SSDs and flash drives and so forth that retain data when the device is shut down. This is an illustration actually directly from the book that does a pretty good job of illustrating the difference between volatile and non-volatile. They also consider the screen display as being a type of volatile memory of sorts. And of course, when it's on, all these things are in operation, as you can see. But when it's shut off, the only thing remaining is the disk drive or SSD that permanently stores this information. This is also another illustration directly from the book, and this is dealing with storage access times. So these different devices have different types of storage access speeds, and right along with faster access times is usually makes it a more expensive component as well. So that's why you don't see as much RAM in a computer as you would see uh, space on an SSD or hard drive, for example. So if you look at the chart here, you can see that RAM is the fastest access rates, and that's important because that's a temporary form of memory, so it's always writing back and forth as the computer is operating. And then notice that SSDs are a little bit faster than the hard drives or hard disks, because the hard drives are mechanical devices. SSD, of course, are solid state devices. A little similar to USB flash drives, but faster. And then it goes on up the line to optical disks, which are the slowest of those in the chart here. And of course, as I mentioned before, optical disks are probably starting to go away. USB flash drives are smaller, and more devices are using those now. You're not going to see as many vehicles or laptops with optical drives as you used to in the past. Now we're moving on to digital security now, and that is the primary focus of this lecture. So digital security has become pretty important. If you look at your personal device, your laptop or tablet or even your smartphone, and start to take a look at what you have on there and try to imagine if you were to lose that information. You can see where digital security becomes pretty important. These devices contain a lot of very crucial information. Sometimes the files on our laptops or other devices are either very critical or completely irreplaceable, such as pictures or that sort of thing. So you'll probably hear me talking later on in the lecture about data backups, which is a very important thing to do, and a lot of things that people do not do is back up their data. And it's a very important thing to make sure you do have some sort of a backup plan for your devices. Um, we're also going to talk about digital security risks right now, which includes different types of viruses and other malicious programs, and also internet and network attacks and so forth. Now, looking at internet and network attacks, we're going to focus on just three of them. The book has more than that, but the three ones that I want to focus on this lecture are malware, which actually breaks up into a number of different items, botnets, and DOS, or denial of service attacks. First thing we're going to talk about is malware or malicious software. And that's simply some sort of software that, if it gets on your machine, will act without your knowledge, and it's designed to alter the operation of the machine or mobile device. It may be designed to do damage or extract information, any number of things. And malware is just a general term for this type of software. We're going to go into more specific types of malware. Now, the first one we're going to talk about is adware, and that's simply a program that gets on your machine, and it may show a banner or pop-up on your web pages, or send email messages or that sort of thing. That's probably the least damaging of the types of malware, although it can be quite annoying. Very often you can accidentally get these on your machine by going and picking up some sort of a free set of software, a free program, and sometimes in the fine print it'll have something, if you don't uncheck, it'll throw something on there like that too. Sometimes it's not too hard to get rid of these things. Often a virus scanner will take care of it for you. Sometimes you can even get rid of it yourself or uninstall it. But this is actually considered to be a type of malware. Now, the next type is ransomware, which is probably the worst type of malware you can get on your system. The reason is that this software, which is kind of a virus, will block or limit access to your computer. As a matter of fact, very often it will threaten to delete your hard drive unless you pay whoever wrote it a certain amount of money. It's usually through some sort of foreign bank account or charge or something like that. And this does happen from time to time. This is why it's very important to have antivirus software on your machine. Usually the only way to get rid of this for sure is to shut the machine down immediately, then do a full system recovery, which requires you to reload the entire operating system. That's the only sure way to get rid of it. And of course, if you do this, you're going to lose all your files, which gets back to the end of this lecture when I'm talking about backing up your data. So this is one big reason right here is ransomware. The next type of malware is the rootkit. That's a program that hides in the background and allows someone to take control of your device, a computer, from a remote location. And that is something that is hidden deep in the operating system, not particularly easy to get rid of. Again, probably the surest way to get rid of that is a full system reload. Often these rootkits are used to gain access to passwords and bank information and that sort of thing. So probably just as bad as ransomware, if not worse, because you may not know that it's there. The next type of malware is called spyware, and that is actually quite a bit more common, probably not as harmless or as harmful as some of the other types of malware, but it can be annoying. Spyware collects information about you, and really, as a matter of fact, when you consider Google Chrome and other browsers, they can behave like spyware in the sense that some of these sites are collecting information about what you're shopping for and that sort of thing. Spyware specifically is a program that's on your computer that you don't know about that is doing the same thing. It's collecting all sorts of information and sending it to somebody. Could also be information that you don't want someone to have in terms of passwords, is that sort of thing. But a much more common type of malware, probably again not as harmful. And most virus scanners will spot these, and they're not too hard to get rid of in most cases. The next type is a Trojan horse, and that is a program that makes itself look like something legitimate in your system to hide from you. It's not like a virus or a worm where it does not replicate itself to other computers, but it does hide on there. And in fact, we're going to talk about denial of service attacks later, and often Trojan horse programs are used for those. And the next one is virus. Now we have actually discussed that previously in our last lecture. So as you probably recall, that is a program that gets on your computer. It can do all sorts of things, from minor annoyances to major damage. It always affects the computer or mobile device in some negative way and does things without the user's knowledge or permission. Also, it can replicate itself to other devices that are connected to that computer. The next type is called a worm, and that's similar to a virus, but it actually copies itself over and over again. And the idea being that it takes up memory or file space, and by taking up those resources, it can actually shut down the computer or an entire network. This is another type of malware that you may see used in denial of service attacks, which we're going to talk about shortly. Okay, the next type of malware is called botnets, and First of all, the idea of a bot is, again, a malicious program. So it could be any one of those previous types of items, worms or viruses or so forth. And what happens is a computer gets one of these programs on it somehow, and it becomes controlled by another computer or device through a network. So when you have a botnet, and apparently it's also called a zombie army, it's a group of computers that are compromised by the same bot. So on a network, they can actually be used together to do a lot more damage than a single computer can. So a botnet can do all sorts of things like send spam email and viruses and other malware. And this is about results in what we're ending up talking about, which is denial of service attacks, where you take down a large system using a botnet or a group of computers that are infected with these viruses. And a compromised computer, that's what they call a zombie. And of course, a zombie's computer is infected by a bot, and then a botnet is many computers on a network that are all zombies at the same time. And that is what is used for these DOS or denial of service attacks. So a denial of service attack or a DOS attack is a coordinated attack against a large system. So it's not something you're going to see on your personal computer. This is something that could, happen to a large system like an eBay or an Amazon or some other large network. And in such an attack, these compromised computers will send an influx of confusing data and useless traffic for the purpose of slowing down the network. It can slow down to the point where it becomes completely unresponsive, and then people legitimately trying to use it will not be able to get there. Of course, this can cause all sorts of issues for large businesses, and anyone who has this type of attack can actually lose quite a bit of money very quickly if their system crashes as a result. Okay, now let's just take a look at some basic safeguards, and this is getting back to PCs, personal PCs or laptops or other devices. Some basic safeguards to make sure that your data is as safe as possible. First of all, antivirus software. If you have a laptop or PC, and I'm talking either Windows or Macs because anything can become infected. Some people think that Macs are immune to viruses, and that is absolutely not true. You don't see as many because Macs don't have as much of a market share as Windows devices, but there are viruses out there still. Every device should have some sort of antivirus software. It does not come with the operating system, although usually there are some preloaded programs that they want you to buy later on. If you are interested in installing one that is free, there's one called AVG, which works quite well and is completely free. Also, be suspicious of anything in emails. Of course, we get unsolicited email all the time. But what you need to do is not open these and then click on links that are in there without knowing what they do. Also, whenever you put some sort of removable media, flash drives or that sort of thing, it's a good idea if you don't know what machine this has been on uh, to scan it using that virus software just to make sure that it's okay. Even if it's been just on a school computer or a library computer, still a good idea to scan that media before you start using it. Firewalls are programs that help keep certain types of attacks away from your computer. And actually, a Windows and most operating systems has one built in. And of course, you can purchase them as well. The one built in usually works pretty well and it's already pre-configured. So if you have Windows, you do have a firewall operating. The most important one, though, is regular backups of critical data. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Okay, backing up data, I just cannot stress enough how important it is to have some sort of a backup of your critical data. And I usually think of data that's critical can be either something that you're working on or have put a lot of work into, or it also can be files that are irreplaceable, which generally are photographs and videos and that sort of a thing. So if you don't have backup copies of this, chances are good sooner or later you may lose this information. Laptops are certainly not indestructible. They can become damaged. I've seen them simply stop working. Even I've seen a fairly new one just simply stop working when it was only a year old. So these things will eventually fail. And if you don't have a good backup of your files, then you're going to lose them. Now, there's lots of ways to back up your files. Some of them are automated at this point and cloud-based, so there's no reason not to have this. So we're going to talk a little bit about backup methods for your data. Okay, there's really only two types of backups because cloud-based is actually a type of offsite, but I do have it separated. So an on-site backup is simply whatever type of backup you're using is stored in the same place that your computer is, or at least probably in the same house or apartment or building. Now, the downside of that is if something more catastrophic happens, like a fire or a theft, you may lose your backups as well as your device. So on-site backups exclusively are not necessarily going to prevent you from losing information. It's a pretty good idea to have some sort of an off-site backup as well, whether that's keeping a flash drive with copies of important files somewhere else, or more often than not, people use cloud-based backups for their important files because that's stored out on the internet on secure devices, and someone else is responsible for taking care of that. So it's a good idea to have a mix of those. I recommend on-site for short-term backups of important files, and then also cloud-based as well. I actually prefer to have two backups of my critical files in two different forms and two different locations. Okay, this is the last slide. Methods of backup. Now, some of these you would commonly use on a laptop or personal computer. Other ones you would only see at more of an industrial level or companies using them. So the idea of a full backup is pretty much everything on your computer, and that's not something that you necessarily would do that often. However, if you get a new computer and you've just started up and you've loaded all your programs on it and all your data has been transferred, that's a good time to do a full backup of everything on it and then save that somewhere safe. So if your computer does crash, you can at least get it back to that point. Most machines are capable of going to the condition where they were in when you purchased it, but that's not going to include all of your software and all of your files, just what it was when you purchased it. Differential and incremental backups are kind of similar, and what they really are is whatever's changed since the last full backup. So this is something that you can actually set up in Windows and can be automatic. As a matter of fact, many newer Windows PCs come with an automatic cloud backup feature that takes care of it for you as long as you have decent internet. It actually takes care of it for you behind the scenes. I do, however, recommend also what I call selective backup, and that is where usually things that you are working on, maybe class files or things that are very important, it's a good idea to just back those up to a flash drive for your computer and put those in a safe place, just so you can get to it quickly and easily if you need to. And also, anything that is something you want to keep permanently that you don't want to lose, which really is mostly pictures and videos and that sort of thing. Also, a good idea to do a selective backup of those, and again, put those in a safe place. or maybe at a different site. Continuous data backup is where it's actually backed up constantly. That's not something you see on personal devices, but more often computers used in offices or industry or that sort of thing. So if you're not doing any sort of backups right now, I strongly recommend that you do. Also, if you do not have a virus program or scanner on your computer, you should definitely load one. And again, the AVG uh, virus scanner is free. I've been using that for well over 10 years, and it's a good free program. There's a paid version as well. That's more interactive, but the free version does nightly scans, which is usually pretty accurate. So that's the end of the lecture 4. This is our last lecture. So there is a quiz on the Canvas site that goes along with this. Now, because we have had to switch to online teaching, this is not your typical multiple choice quiz. This is an essay quiz. So there are 10 questions, 5 points apiece. This essay, so you'll be typing in your answer. There is a reminder, make sure that you put your answers in your own words. If you do not plagiarize anything from the book. I've seen students do this before. They just cut and paste from the book, and it's pretty easy to tell that they did that. The idea is that you put it in your own words, and of course also plagiarizing is a big no-no with KVCC as well, so you don't want to do that. It's only 10 questions, and everything up to this point from now on is also due at the end of the semester, so you have until midnight on April 27th to complete that.